Thank you. Welcome to the first meeting of the newly constituted Audit Committee. And as it is the first meeting, can I have nominations, please, for the election of Chairman?
Councillor Grayson.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes, is anyone seconding that? Councillor Delaney. Any other nominations? In which case, Councillor Drayson, you're elected.
Thank you, members. I'll take it as a vote of confidence. I've not made too many mistakes. And here's one. Right. Now, item 2 is the election of Vice Chair to seek nominations for the election of Vice Chairman for the remainder of the municipal year. Are there any nominations? Councillor Biggs. Councillor Barnes.
I will second that.
Seconded by Councillor Pearce. Any other nominations? No? Thank you. Councillor Barnes, you are my tried and tested Vice Chair. Thank you.
We should exchange mutual congratulations.
Right, as Mr Valence alluded to earlier, it's counted as a new committee because we've separated out the standards part, and the standards committee will now be meeting twice a year in its own right. So this is the first meeting of the Audit Committee. Reminder to members using microphones correctly and the need to speak up, so that those watching online or viewing the webcast later can clearly hear what is being said. And also our hearing aids are not available, so again, members can't use them tonight, so it would be helpful to speak clearly and loudly into the microphones. If there are any votes tonight, could you please make sure that you show clearly and leave your hand up until the clerk has noted your votes. Thank you. We're joined in the chamber this evening by Mr Patrick Farmer, the committee's independent member, Mr Andrew Valence, Deputy Chief Executive and Section 151 Officer, Gary Angel, the Council's Internal Audit Manager, Anna Everett, the Corporate Programme Risk and Improvement Manager, and Louise Hollingsworth, from Democratic Services and Clerk to the committee. Online, we are joined tonight by Suzanne Antrobus, the Interim Deputy Monitoring Officer. We've also got Darren Wells, the Lead External Auditor from Grant Thornton, and not a member of the committee, but watching, we also welcome to Councillor Teresa Killeen. Agenda item 3, the minutes of the last meeting. Do I have your authority to sign the meetings as a correct record? Yeah, yes, thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 4, any apologies? I don't think so.
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Gray.
Oh, yes, of course, sorry. Thank you. Any additional items?
No, there are none, Chair.
Thank you. And agenda item 6, disclosures of interest. To receive any disclosure by members of personal and disclosable pecuniary interests in matters on the agenda, the nature of any interest, and whether the member regards the personal interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Members are reminded of the need to repeat their declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. No, thank you. So we move on to agenda item 7, and we welcome Darren Wells of Grant Thornton to present the report of the External Auditor, the Audit Progress Report and sector updates. Mr Wells, good evening.
Good evening, thank you, Chair. I will just say a few words. I'm getting back feedback. That's fine, thank you. I'll say a few words about the report, but I hope the report is fairly self-explanatory. It serves two purposes. It provides a sector update, and it also highlights the timeline of where we are on our progress of the 23-24 audit to date. I think at your last meeting, well, the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee, we set out that we had intended to start the financial statements audit at the beginning of July. Unfortunately, with the delay of the publication of the statement of accounts, that was pushed back until August, and our ability to progress the audit from August has been slightly limited by the availability of transaction listings from which we can sample. So we've decided to pause the audit, and we will come back in November and pick up with the intention to undertake the audit from November through until January. I only mention this because with the deferred start, there is a risk that we bump up against the statutory deadline of the end of February should something emerge as a result of the audit that consumes audit time and takes time for officers to respond to any of the queries that are raised. So there's a slight risk, but nevertheless, there is a risk. The rest of the report sets out items that I think might be of interest to the committee, and I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Any questions from any members? I will say I found it useful, the lessons learned from recent annual reports. I fully intend looking at the link that you put in as well, but it was quite useful to see those details. Obviously, we're not affected by the special needs ourselves as rather. Unitary councils, I wonder if you were just seeing something that we hadn't yet, that was included in there. But no, all in all, the scary figure in the whole thing, of course, is the spending and how councils generally spending has gone up 60% on homelessness since 2010, 2011. We're not immune from that, and it's a major draw on our finances. But no, I don't think anyone else has got a question, so thank you, Mr. Wells. Are you doing agenda item 8 as well, as I haven't seen Raymond here?
Yes, I will, Chair, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
agenda item 8.
So just, do we note report?
I think we
Noted, thank you. Yes, agenda item 8. Sorry, Darren.
Thank you. So agenda item 8 is management's responses to general audit inquiries that we've raised. And the purpose is to come before this committee to make sure that there's nothing that members are aware of from their knowledge that might contradict any of the responses that management have made to us. So it's part of our risk assessment as we plan the audit.
Thank you. First question, is this regular? Because I don't remember seeing this myself previous years.
It has been in place for a number of years. Some councils, and I don't recall if that's the case at Rother, it may have been conducted outside of the committee.
Yeah, well, because it's interesting in this that the audit committee is mentioned virtually on every page, and it quite clearly puts the responsibility to this committee and that we should be aware of it. I'm going to speak personally now and I'll take any members. I didn't see anything, as you phrased it then, about contradiction. I didn't see anything I'd want to contradict. There are probably things not in this meeting, say for the next time, that I'd want to understand from management what they meant by some of the answers. But there's nothing in there that rang any alarm bells to me and that made me worry that we were not being kept fully informed. But I'll see if there's any other members got any questions to ask you. Councillor Barnes.
Just to note that it will need slight updating, I think, and we probably need to ask Andrew to do those. There are also one or two places where the wording seems to me slightly confused and where greater clarity might actually help. I'm very happy to draw Andrew's attention to those outside this meeting, rather than weary you with pettifogging points.
No, I think that's the point I was making, that members, I say there's no contradictions, but there are things that you read and go, what do they mean by that? So members are invited to send their questions, those thoughts, to Mr. Valance for a better explanation for us. But I say it's, as far as you're concerned, Mr. Wells, that's a perfectly good report that we're all noting and supporting. Councillor Thomas, and then I'll come on to Mr. Farmer.
No, also, I should have declared earlier my position as chair of Rother District Housing Company, although it's not prejudicial in relation to my question. Okay? I noticed that you use Bevan Britain for advice relating to the Blackfriars site. There are also the solicitors used by the council in relation to the Blackfriars site. Is there any potential for a conflict of interest there, please?
Assuming there's potential, but these firms will have wars in the company between sets of teams of lawyers, and it will be normal practice for them to keep that discreet between two separate teams.
Mr. Farmer, and I have seen your hand up. Suzanne.
Might be.
Oh, were you going to answer? No, I'll go to Mr. Farmer and then I'll come to you. Mr. Farmer.
Okay. Related parties, there's nothing there at all mentioning the housing company, which surprises me. I would have thought, as it's a very major issue in terms of a related party, I'm surprised there isn't a question about it or an answer from management.
Darren, are you able to shed light on that one?
Well, no, Chair, because these are management's responses to us. So I think it's a question that has to go back to management.
He hasn't asked a question about it.
Yeah, I suppose it's because there isn't a specific question about it, but I think Mr. Farmer's question is it a related party?
Yes.
Full stop. And
Yes, it is a related.
yeah,
So why hasn't the auditor asked the question?
So I think the paper asked queries from management about how related parties are identified. So it gives there's a placeholder there for management to set out any of the related parties that relate to the council on this year's audit.
yeah, thank you. I can see it's more how we identify them and have there been any changes. So no, there haven't been any changes. So the answer is no. We do obviously have the housing company as a special little project that we're very interested in, but I think the questions weren't asked that prompted that as an answer.
Okay. A second question for Darren, really, is we're as an audit committee asked whether we think these responses are appropriate or we've noticed anything that incongruous about them. As our auditor, are you satisfied with all the responses?
That's for you, Chair. So there was nothing in those responses that caused us to think that we needed to change our risk assessment or introduce new risk procedures. So there's nothing that would concern me based on the replies that have been made.
Thank you, Dan. I think I'm right in thinking that the answers were supplied before Mr. Valance joined us, and again, Mr. Valance has checked those answers and he hasn't got any concerns over them. No. Suzanne, your hand has gone down. Did we answer it magically?
Chair, very quickly, it was just to assist further with that conflict point, I think, with regards Bevan Britton, which is just to say that Bevan Britons, every time they get instructions, will do their own conflict of interest check as part of their client care. So as well as putting the information barriers up, they're the ones that do the sense checking as well. So if they have agreed to take the council on, then they are content that there is no conflict there. And also, if they did have any concerns at all, would have raised it with one or both of the parties. So just to add to that assurance.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any other points on this report? It is for noting, plus we'll send any queries to Mr. Vallance. Councillor Barnes.
It's really seeking a comment from Darren. The stuff on climate all seems to be rather new. Is this an innovation? Because there is no statutory framework governing us around that. What we're doing is purely voluntary. Or are we bound in some sense by the statute that says the country will deliver by 2050? Because it's a very new legal area. I'm not aware of any subsidiary legislation which says anything about how we are to get there. You see occasional government decisions, which presumably we then conform with. But it does seem to be a big new area, which I wasn't quite as conscious of in early years. Is it as new as it seems?
Mr. Wells?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is relatively new. I would say that we have been making inquiries in respect of climate and climate action for maybe the last 2 years. And that's principally driven for two routes. One, a consideration as we undertake the value for money review. We bring in consideration of climate actions and how the council may be addressing its objectives. And secondly, what has become apparent, certainly in the private sector, is that there could be an impact on assets as they potentially may become obsolete depending on the nature of the company, given climate actions. So our regulator has pushed us as external auditors to think about that and to document that. And hence the inquiries.
Thank you, Darren. Eddie? No, okay, so do we note this and we'll send any queries to Mr. Vallance with some of those answers? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Good night. Agenda item 9. This is the formal hybrid committee meeting protocol, a review of. Lisa Cooper from Democratic Services has joined us online to introduce this report. Good evening, Lisa.
Good evening, members. Hello, everybody. Just to outline this report then. So since February 2022, the Council has been able to facilitate hybrid formal committee meetings, allowing both members and officers to join formal committee meetings remotely, as we are this evening. Following the first year of operation, a number of minor amendments were made under delegation, but no fundamental review has taken place up until now. So this review comes on the back of a couple of requests from members and on the advice of the Council's monitoring officer, Linda Walker. So attached to Appendix A is the current protocol with proposed amendments as shown, most of which are relatively minor. The main proposed amendments are concerning attendance, so that remote attendance by members should not constitute attendance at a formal council meeting for the purposes of the 6-month rule, where previously we had saying that was. Calling of an executive decision, we had said that we felt it was necessary previously for a member to be physically present in the room to enable calling. Now we're saying we don't feel they have to be present in the room because they can, talk to members in the room. They don't have to be there if they're on remote. And then thirdly, another one we felt was worth highlighting is remote access to confidential sessions. It's proposed that no member would have, in order to safeguard the integrity of confidential discussions, it's recommended that there's no remote access by any member, even a committee member who is present online. So that's the sort of fundamental changes that the rest are fairly minor. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? I've got one at the end, but Councillor McGurk.
Thanks, Chair. I can absolutely see the logic in the change that, meaning that the members have to attend at least one meeting in, be physically present every 6 months. I think that's sensible. I can see why that's the case. I'm not sure about the confidential settings, though, unless there's something, confidential meetings, unless there's a reason I'm not aware of. There are plenty of confidential meetings which take place over Teams every day, and there is no breach of confidentiality. And as long as we're using Teams in a safe and way that's compliant with our policy, then I can't see why wouldn't constitute why we couldn't attend confidentially over Teams.
Do you want me to respond, Chair?
Yes, please.
Only to say specifically that was at the request of Linda Walker, our monitoring officer, who felt that you couldn't guarantee the integrity of confidential discussion because you don't know who else is in the room with somebody. But maybe Suzanne would like to comment in Linda's absence.
Yes, it's really just to add to that. If we are in meetings dealing with sort of confidential items, then they are part 2 items. I appreciate that there may be other, if you like, confidential conversations happening via Teams, but these at cabinet and committee meetings, etc., these are actually confidential under statute, under law, and I think that's why we are insisting on that extra level of security for it, just to ensure that there aren't any breaches there.
Thank you, Suzanne. Councillor Biggs and Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McGurk's already mentioned item 7, the 6-month period you must attend. Is there any exceptions to this rule?
No, I think that is the legislation which we've operated anyway.
Although I think there can be a dispensation, can't there? I'm thinking about the deputy leader.
Chair, if I may, through you, yes, there can be dispensations if required, particularly for health reasons. But this is about, if you like, I don't want to say people just not turning up, but it's that turning up, without a compelling reason not to.
Yes, thank you, Suzanne. Councillor Barnes.
2 rather trivial points, but not unimportant when we're talking about Section 2 members. Leave microphones, muting cameras on. A number of us do not have that kind of broadband width, and it's probably more sensible not, I think, to stipulate that members have cameras on except when speaking. I think when speaking is appropriate. The other one, which slightly odd, we've lost in little b, the provision that members should confirm whether they're going to attend remotely. What we really need to do is what we currently do on the day, which is to indicate if we are going to be present rather than remotely, because that could affect the quorum. And a remote member cannot contribute to the quorum.
There was definitely a nod there from Lisa.
So I think they're very small drafting points, but I think they do need to be tidied up.
They're not. Your first point was one I was going to bring up last time I tell you anything. Lisa.
Chair, sorry, just to say, we found that obviously we don't need to know in advance whether you're attending remotely or not in terms of technology, and I think that's what it was about in the past. But you're right, we now have Eleanor does email out every meeting day to just to check who is coming in remotely, and that seems to be working well, just so we know that we are current.
Thank you. And on Councillor Barnes's first point, I was, in fact, as if by magic, Councillor Colleen had disappeared. But I'm not picking on you, Teresa, but I'm saying I personally would say members attending should not be required to leave their cameras on at all, because sometimes the only person anyone sees is the member sitting at home who might forget that they're even on camera. The camera used to be turned on so we could see they were present because it counted towards the attendance. Now it doesn't count towards the attendance. I don't see any need to keep the cameras on, plus the wavelength band that Councillor Barnes referred to. And it would be better, I think, that they only turn their cameras and their microphones on when to speak. Having said that, I also know that, in fact, perhaps, as if by magic she turned her camera off, I wonder if Lisa can confirm this, because I thought at one point the Democratic Services full stop preferred members who weren't going to come to a meeting to say anything to actually watch the webcast rather than join the meeting. Is that still the case? And that's not,
yes.
Again, that's not having a dig at Councillor Colleen, who's with us tonight.
No, I mean, as you know, Chair, it's much easier to manage a meeting when you don't have lots of participants in the room remotely as well. So if a member just wants to watch a meeting and not contribute, it's best they just watch the live webcast on the website rather than joining the remote meeting.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Councillor McGirt.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry. Can I just clarify that you said that remote attendance wouldn't count as attendance, but surely it would still be recorded as attendance on our attendance record. Yeah, so it's just that we have to attend once every 6 months to maintain that formal engagement, whatever it's called, but we can attend remotely, and that would still be recorded as an attendance.
You'd still be at the meeting.
Right, so
you'd still be, yes,
there.
it wouldn't count to the 6 month one, but yes, you'd still be at the meeting. You could still speak. You can still.
And you'd still be recorded in the minutes.
Yes, thank you.
I suppose my question was going to be then how we take Councillor Barnes and my suggestion about the cameras. I don't know. Do we have a vote here to say we would like to see cameras off and then send it to you? Who else does it go to after this committee? Full council?
Chair, it's going straight to council.
Yeah.
So you can just move an amendment now just to change that as you see fit.
Council.
And council will just get it as you wish it to be amended.
What, move it tonight or move it at full council? Tonight.
No, move it tonight if you agree as a committee. That's what you'd like to do. It's your own protocol.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to suggest that then, but the wording's not going to be dead accurate because I can't find it here now. But on the part where it talks about members joining remotely, that we have their cameras off as well as their microphones off until they're speaking. Would anyone second that? Thank you, Councillor McGirt. Can we have a vote in favour, please? Thank you. That was carried, so that will be an amendment going forward to full council. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay.
I think you're next, aren't you?
Yes.
Agenda item 10, Executive Procedure Rules Amendment to the Constitution. Lisa Cooper's going to introduce this again, but it's really only it's virtually noting. Carry on, Lisa.
It is. It is, Chair, thank you. Yeah, so at the Cabinet meeting on the 2nd of September, Cabinet agreed an amendment to their executive procedure rules. So this is just formal for you to recommend on to Council to have that incorporated into the Constitution. So it's just in order to allow the leader of the Council to change membership of steering groups, which Cabinet appoints itself. And previously it would have to have gone back to Cabinet to agree any changes to its membership. So this now just gives authority to the leader to do so in agreement with the deputy leaders and relevant group leaders where appropriate. So it's just making that formal recommendation to Council.
Do we move that and pass it on to full council? I don't think we can argue with it. Do I need to move, have it moved and seconded and voted on? Yes. Well, I'll move it then. Councillor Biggs seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 11, internal audit report to the 30th of June. Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening all. This is my usual quarterly report. This particular report is to the 30th of June 2024. The report updates members on the internal audit activity in the first quarter of 2024-25. Gives you a brief progress update on the implementation of outstanding audit recommendations, and there's a little update there also on the global internal audit standards. Firstly, a summary of audit activity in quarter one. In paragraph 3, it's on the printed page, the published PDF of page 5. We issued 4 reports in the first quarter of the year. The executive summaries are produced in Appendix A as usual, that's page 19 onwards. These are debtors, Destin property management system, climate emergency, and the academy end of year processes. These audits provided good and substantial assurance where rated and no significant areas of concern were identified. So it's a fairly straightforward one this quarter rather. Implementation of audit recommendations is on paragraph 4 onwards. Progress on the outstanding audit recommendations has been followed up as usual by me, and the current position is shown in Appendix B, which is page 29. In summary, firstly, the number of recommendations in the old year section, which is 8, has not changed since the last quarter, although there has been some progress made on some of these. Second point is the good progress is being made on the recommendations in the latest year, even though we've added more again this quarter. Finally then, the global internal audit standards, which is on paragraph 8, page 16 onwards. The purpose of this section is A, to remind everyone that there are new global internal audit standards, which we're going to have to try and conform with. To inform you that the full effect of the new global standards on the public sector internal audit standards, which we currently follow, is yet to be determined, and we are awaiting further guidance from the IASAB. And finally, to provide you with some information on the content of the new global standards, given that they will likely place additional obligations on the committee regarding governing of the internal audit function. In the meantime, I'll be carrying out a gap analysis between the old standards and new, and we'll be looking to implement any new requirements that can easily be accommodated. In other words, I'll be picking off the small, low-hanging fruit to start with until we get firm guidance from the IASBA. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor McGirt.
Gary, I just wanted to ask a question about next month's audits. Is that okay? So I can see we've got scheduled an audit on disabled facilities grants. And I was just wondering what the criteria we would be looking at are. So, for instance, would we be, sorry to put you on the spot, I don't know if you've thought about this, but I'm just interested in things like timeliness. Are those the kind of things that we would be looking at? So timeliness of DFGs being used from application to implementation, and also potentially the effect that they've had, so how long would they be being used, and therefore preventing escalation of social care needs, this kind of thing. I don't know if I'm explaining myself clearly, but...
On the first point, yes. If you mean timeliness in respect of using the grant money available to us up, yes, we comment on that. We look at that to make sure we're using as much as we can in each year. I think that's not usually a problem because it's usually oversubscribed. I think it's just the case of when they can physically do it within the year. The second point was to do with how long it's used, because I don't think we wouldn't measure that in the audit, because of course we could change, we could have major adaptations on a property, and of course the person could die the next day once it's all complete. So I'm afraid that it lasts as long as it lasts on that one. So that wouldn't something be covered in the audit. I've got the key objectives of the audit. I've just got them out when he was asking that they're correctly processed and calculated and paid, that the grant expenditure is properly controlled and all subsidy is received, that the fee paid to the adaptation support service is agreed in advance and paid in accordance with the terms of that agreement, so we're paying what we agreed to pay, and the performance and workload of occupational therapists is monitored.
Thanks, Gary. I mean, I can understand why we, as a district council, would be measuring things in the way that you described, because that's very much about the process and the implementation, this kind of thing. I'm thinking more about the outcome for the person, and I suppose that's going to be more of a county council, something that they might want to look at, because for me, in my experience, one of the main purposes of a disabled facilities grant is to prevent, reduce and delay need for people to access more formal services and for them to maintain their independence in their own home and not have to rely on others. So in terms of an outcome for the individual, that's something which I would be concerned about, but I can understand why it's not something we would be looking at, because I suppose the role of the occupational therapist and wider services is part of that wider system rather than just the provision. It would just be, I just wonder if that is measured in other ways. But thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I think what you're concerned about is the quality at the end of the day, what the outcome is, and we can't measure that, I don't think. But as you say, it's more like a negative that they don't end up somewhere else because of it. Mr. Farmer.
Gary, as usual with your report, some of the interesting stuff is in the appendixes, particularly the debtors audit. I notice you've highlighted a significant amount of arrears in estates and other legal services and so forth. It seems fairly significant loss of money. I'm surprised you didn't bring that up in the main report. And also, I'm not sure why, in view of those comments, you can say that debtors have a substantial rating in terms of your audit.
Yes.
Yes. It's because it's outside the scope of the audit. That's why it hasn't affected the insurance rating. But we felt it was a significant thing that needs to be brought to management's attention so they can do something about it. The monitoring of arrears, I mean, the debtors clerk will send out reminders. She will agree payment plans with them when they make contact with her. But, she's just doing the paperwork side of it, the sending stuff out. Sometimes you get more response if you speak to a person direct rather than send them a reminder, which they can easily ignore. And it is a responsibility of departments, the managers in the different services, to pursue these debts. But there's always been a culture rather of not doing that. I think it needs to be looked at why the debts have gone up so much. I can't tell you what makes that up, because the report will get it off. It doesn't break it down into services. So I should imagine there's a fair bit of that will be estates. But apart from that, I don't know what the rest of it's made up of or why it is accumulated. This is debt over 3 months old, so it could be a lot older than that actually. But to answer your question, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I suppose really you're saying it's not the debtors department's job to do it. Then whose is it? I would ask management. Maybe it's Andrew who needs to answer this.
Just before Andrew does it, I was going to say, I've got something to say on this. Go on, Andrew.
As Gary did actually say, it's the service manager's responsibility to collect the debts. If they issue bills and invoices, it's for them to collect that money with assistance from appropriate legal or other staff. Certainly my last authority, the way that we sort of reinforced that notion was to actually start recharging the bad debt back to the departments so that they didn't just get 100% of the income, job done, finances problem or the corporate problem. It's their income, they should be making sure it's collectible fundamentally with assistance from other parts of the council as appropriate.
Are you recommending that this council does that?
We are going to look into the whole process from start to finish. We've got new legal director coming in fairly soon. Got new chief accountant, new systems, new planning systems. So we're going to fundamentally rework the whole system from scratch. Probably bring debt into the finance department. It's not in the finance department at the minute.
Oh.
It's in the Reg and Ben's department at the minute.
Strange.
So a fundamental business re-engineering of the whole thing. In due course.
So just before I come to you, Councillor Bigg, this was the item I wanted to single out tonight. And we've said here that the arrears are not responsible for the debt team, but they're vital to the success of any budgetary controls. And budget controls are one of the functions of this committee. Therefore, I believe that we should add to our noting tonight, we should add that we want the SLT to consider prompt action is taken to chase up these arrears. When the council has an income of X, to only have X minus 10% is a big gap. I understand that is the plan. That's the comment there about the corporate issue mentioned. I think there's been a meeting already about debt collection and the debt audit next month, but we should be starting as soon as possible, either to collect them or to write them off. And again, if they're going to be written off, the sooner they're written off, the better. So I wanted to add that tonight, a message to the SLT that they look seriously at the arrears. But I'll come to Councillor Biggs and Councillor Barnes. Councillor Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to mention, as my colleague Danielle's already said that, all three say that we've got debts that haven't been collected, and I find that quite concerning. Earlier in the year, we actually put up the green bin to 1.8 million charging services. A lot of people in the rural areas, which I cover, found it very difficult to find this money. And it went up more than what it should have done, because we put it up to get extra money in because we had a debt of 3.8 million. Yet here, I'm reading 3 bits of paper to say we've got lots of debts outstanding, and it appears to me that people are not getting it in. And I think that's despicable, because now people are actually paying when we've got all this money outstanding.
Councillor Barnes.
At a time when we're actually in very straitened circumstances, having to reduce services. What's even more worrying is, and I'll come back to the SIL one in a moment because I have a definite suggestion to make there, but the legal services stopped doing something and didn't even tell us they'd stopped doing it. So somewhere in there was a major failure of management. I really do wonder whether, I recognise it's the manager's fault, but when you identify that kind of glaring fault, I wonder whether we shouldn't have put that up in lights, in a sense, because legal services seem to have totally reassessed their role, and we're told now that they're no longer going to undertake that work, which means they should have warned us that they weren't going to undertake that work, and we should have been able to put a new system in place. So that's a worry. It's about 500,000, I think, that's in arrears, which is a substantial amount of money, which would go a long way to plug both either the gap which our savings programme is trying to cover, or indeed actually help keep perhaps community grants a little higher. We'll come back to that, no doubt, on another occasion. I do think we need to look at these appendices in some detail, and therefore I'll stop there, but I would like to come back to the one on SIL in particular, which is very worrying indeed for a number of reasons.
Andrew, can I just get your slant on that legal services bit and how we're going forward on that if they're not accepting responsibility?
Suzanne has been talking to them.
Oh, Suzanne, I'm told you've been doing the talking.
Hello, Chair. If I come through you. Oh, I think I've got some voice back coming back. Oh,
If
that's
you're okay
better.
now, turn mine off.
There we are. Oh, much better. Yes. I don't know whether I'm going to help or hinder, to be honest, Chair, but I will tell you what I know, which is that when the shared service was set up, the debts were recovered. The legal work transferred over to Wealdon Legal Shared Services for them to do the legal work, and they do continue to do that legal work. But what appears to have happened is, and this I'm going back to 2021, 2022, the officer who transferred over to do that work did a lot of the internal management, as in monitoring of the debts thereafter. So when you go to court and get the order for the debtor to pay a certain amount, then obviously somebody needs to keep track of those payments being made. The position is apparently that was never intended to be covered by the shared service arrangement, but was, if you like, by an officer going over and above. That officer then moved on, and we were left with something of a gap, because my understanding again is that it became clear that this officer was going over and above, but that Wealdon could not now accommodate that because it shouldn't have been happening in the first place, is their take on it. So it is something that we do as a council need to address. It's always difficult because everybody's looking back in time now to how this sort of situation arose, but the legal work is still being done and the orders are being obtained. It's how the payment of the monies from those orders is being managed that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, and that fits into the whole question of arrears for the SLT to look at, but thank you for that, Suzanne. Councillor Barnes, you wanted to come back in on SIL?
Yes, the SIL one is even more worrying, I think, than 500,000 of arrears, partly because we're setting a very dangerous precedent in not collecting money from developers. But we are talking here potentially of hundreds of thousands. I do wonder whether we shouldn't be investing in some capacity. I think a business plan would have to be drawn up, but investing in some capacity that actually targeted those arrears specifically. It could be self-funding, and if it's self-funding, it's worth doing simply to close the gap. But if it actually made a handsome profit, which I suspect it might, then actually it would be even more worthwhile. So I would like really to move tonight that we do recommend that to the officer team. And I would look for some support from the committee in so doing. I don't know whether Gary was able to actually get any handle on the size of the sums that might be involved. And if I could just press you a little, Gary, I'm not expecting any exact figure, but what sort of ballpark figure are we talking about?
Thank you, Chair. We're certainly talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, probably the low hundreds. thousands, but that's the sort of figure we're talking about. And of course, because internal audit has referred several cases to the planning service but the guy that's doing he's doing a very good job, but he's only one person and he can't do everything. And they didn't have very good enforcement in place till he came in, and now with his help, they are enforcing on newer cases, the interest and penalties, things like that. But some of the cases we referred across are starting to get a bit old now, because we've stopped referring them across because there wasn't any point if they weren't going to be followed up. But there's some are 2 or 3 years old now, so of course it's hard to resurrect a case that's quite old, because you get resistance from the person that we want the money from, saying, "Oh, we know you never told me about this," and things like that. Well, that's not incorrect, and tried to muddy the water on that. But he has pursued one case through legal services, and he's got about at least half the money in from it, and I think he's working on another one. But it's slow progress in the very old cases, and so understandably he's focusing on the newer stuff where it's more likely to get the money in. So, but yeah, there's quite a bit of money in it potentially, and I welcome members recommending that they get more resource.
Yes, I mean, dedicated resource, because clearly we haven't got the capacity at the moment. But if it pays for itself, I'm a bit troubled about being too relaxed about the old debts because of the natural justice point, which is it's tantamount to rewarding the people who behave badly, and we don't actually reward the people who behave well. And that always seems to me a real problem for a public authority if they get in that kind of bind.
Thank you. Anything else for Gary on any of these audits? Yes, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also interested in, and I'm sure the committee is, the report about the climate activities. And there are also main issues which are found, which could give rise to a certain amount of anxiety. The report starts by noting that a high proportion of the Council's utility bills are based on estimated usage rather than actual readings. Now, quite apart from any climate implications of that in itself is an interesting finding, because presumably if you have estimated bills, you later on have to have the real bills, and then you have to reconcile the two. So presumably there's a degree of bureaucratic waste involved in having the two sets of bills. It also raises the question, why? Why is it that we are not able to read our own meters and report the readings to the utility companies in the usual way? So that is interesting in itself. But it also means that our figures in relation to our effectiveness in terms of our climate policies may be far from accurate. So there are implications there as well. And there's a very good recommendation there. Service managers should be reminded to take quarterly meter readings on property which falls within their area of responsibility, and B, to ensure they review the bills to identify any anomalies that may require further investigation. The point is also made that those anomalies might point to leakages, for example, or misuse, etc. So the failure to follow up anomalies is also significant. So I just draw the attention of committee members to what is in that part of the report, because I think it's got a significance. And I'm just interested in any comments which Gary might make on it. Thank you.
Gary, any comments? Well, I mean, I think
Other than
it's
I think
fairly
it's
self-explanatory, because the recommendations speak for themselves.
Yeah, well, I'll only say I absolutely agree, as you expect me to, that it's important we get proper readings, because we could be overpaying. We're not noticing, wastage, and I suppose we haven't got the proper benchmark figures for what we're using either, because it's. I'm not sure we do ever get an accurate reading on some of these. I think they are estimated after estimated after estimated. So it could be some quite significant findings there potentially.
Thank you. Councillor Delaney.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that, I just wondered, we might be showing my ignorance, but why we aren't all using smart meters, which would take the whole issue of officers needing to read these things out off the table.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Vance to put words to the noise he just made alongside me, which seemed to be saying, good question.
I've just come to that thought myself while we're not using smart meters, so I think we should.
I don't know, are businesses allowed to have them? I hope they are. So, yeah. Okay. Councillor Peake.
Sorry, Chair. Reading our report and what Gary's been saying, it must be quite concerning for us as a committee, the amount of revenue that we must be losing. And surely, as Councillor Barnes has said, we need to... If we've only got one officer looking at 2 cases, how much money must we be losing? Surely it must be financially better to employ 2, 3, maybe 4 officers. If we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, their wages are nowhere near going to come to that. If they can recoup that, surely it's a better investment to go that way. But I'm very concerned the amount of money that we're losing.
Yes, but potentially these add up to quite a lot, because we, like with the electricity, with the meters, we don't know. We have no idea how much. I've noted something from that which we'll come to at the end. But with the I just wanted to mention, as Suzanne's online, that the SLA over order things. Was it? Procurement, sorry. Having defeated Mr. Ellis, it's defeated Andrew Vallance, and we've given it to Linda Walker, Suzanne Antrobus, who apparently are on the case, and it's our outstanding from 2018-19, and hopefully it won't go into 25. So go on, Suzanne, and then I'll come to Councillor Barnes.
I was about to say, Chair, if I may, I had a meeting with the Wealden Legal on Friday just gone, and I chased up with them where the actual agreement is, and they assured me that they are chasing it up. It is on the top of my list. It is something that I am determined to get done sooner rather than later. Bear with me. I will keep on keeping on.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
I shall say tiger to Ms. Antrobus, and I'm very grateful that she's doing that. But it would be interesting to know, we issued these recommendations on SIL on the 25th of October 2022. Potential enforcement cases referred by internal audit. And the third recommendation was to produce an enforcement policy. I just would like to know a little bit more about how many cases have actually been pursued. Here we have a legal services department. Presumably if you pursue a case and win, you can claim your costs. I imagine you can also claim the cost of officer time. You certainly can in planning enforcement matters. So I'd like actually to know a little bit more in detail about how many cases are being pursued and the outcome.
A very valid point. I'm just wondering how we do it from here. I suppose we asked for an update at the next meeting with details through the SRT, but obviously Gary will be the one delivering it.
I think we do need a report.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'm just trying to think of some wording here, but I think the gist will be good enough and we can. So this report, and thank you again, Gary, and I'd also like to say thank you to Gary for, if you notice, the Destin property, which was supposed to be an audit, wasn't in any way ready to be audited, but Gary's team helpfully did a review and hopefully pointed the management in the directions of that. Now, the recommendation for tonight is that we resolve that it be noted. However, I want to add, to capture what we've just been saying, and it will be, and I think I'll need time to think of them wording wise from the minutes. But one, I would suggest that we note it, but that the SLT take prompt action in following up arrears across the council. That the SLT consider employing dedicated resources specifically to the recovery of SIL monies. And what was the last thing Councillor Barnes said that I was going to add into SIL? It was the business case, but there was something else.
I think the business case is for the senior leadership team.
Yeah.
What I think we need is a report back on the actions.
That's it. So it was a report back on the numbers of cases involved and the full amount, I think, as well, of the SIL gaps in our account. And also that in relation to the climate emergency audit, I was going to say that we follow up the recommendations that Gary has made, or emphasise the recommendations that Gary has made about reading the meters across the business, across all the properties that people are responsible for. But I suppose in brackets it would be all smart meters. Modern technology has caught up with us, but and I'm not sure if there's anything else that we should add on to that. So, Councillor Delane.
I was just in though, I did zoom in on the debtors thing as well. Yeah, there is the debt for invoices, and but it's also about that there was a problem with staff being able to do the rent reviews across the estate, and so at times commercial rents not being billed because they weren't able to get to those. So there's a loss of income from that as well, which I would certainly like to see a figure for, and if there was an action plan to correct that, and if it needs more staff in some way, I think we would be supportive of that, and it wouldn't cost anything to the council.
Yes, I was coming to you because you were nodding your head.
Management have already taken action in response to that audit, and we have recruited extra staff on the basis of they're more than pay for themselves.
Councillor Barnes.
I think, Chairman, too, we should congratulate the department that got all round good, because I think we should recognise good things as well as pick up bad things. And I think we should applaud Gary's flexibility in where he couldn't do a review. Nevertheless, he actually managed to deduce some lessons, I think, for that department. And I think that was a very good move, and I do congratulate him.
Yes, indeed, thank you. That is noted. And also, just expanding that without picking him up too much, yet another good internal audit. No one's ever sort of pressurised us into going for an external internal auditor, which sounds Irish anyway. Sorry, sounds strange. But long may we have our internal auditors, because they do a job. I don't think the managers dismiss them. I think the managers take notice of them. And thank you, Gary, to you and your team. Thank you.
Just wanted to say that the state income audit will be reported to the next quarter. It's got a minimal assurance. There's lots of issues found. It sounds like management are already acting on them, so that's good. So hopefully we'll be able to show that was then, this is now when we report that. So
thank you. So noting with those three, which was about the meter readings, the SLT arrears and the SLT SIL. Yes, do we agree with that? All those in favour? Can I have a seconder? Sorry. Councillor McGurk. And all those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you, Gary. Now move on to agenda item 12, which is the risk management update. And Anna Everett to introduce. Good evening, Anna.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. So this is to consider the updated risk register, and I've tried to pull out in the report some key risks and also some emerging risks. The other thing I wanted to mention is the risk policy gets reviewed annually. You reviewed it last October and it was approved in December. I haven't recommended any amendments to the risk policy, but contained within the policy there is the risk appetite statements. And because we find ourselves in difficult financial situation and we've got some high risks concerning our budget, I'm proposing that Cabinet members do a more in-depth exercise to look at the risk appetite statements. For example, the one around project risks is showing to be medium to high at the moment. And I think it's going to be a good idea for Cabinet members to reflect on that to see actually potentially is it a bit too high. So last year when I came to this committee, we did the review of the policy, but I'm going to hold that over to allow for a more in-depth discussion on the risk appetite. So moving on, and please just stop me at any point to ask any questions. So I've highlighted a few things in the risk register where our risk score exceeds the risk appetite score, and also where things are of a particular concern or if we've got emerging risks. And if it's okay, Chair, I'll just run through those quickly before taking any more questions. So political, the first one is political changes impact delivery of council services. It still exceeds the risk score, but because things are still unknown at the moment about funding arrangements and things like that, it seems right that that should remain on the register. The second one is, of course, one that you're all very familiar with, and it's social, and the council can't meet its housing objectives. Again, things haven't got any better. We're not in a position where we can really reduce the risk on this. It's becoming, the housing supply is still difficult. Housing providers aren't building as much as they used to, and I'm sure Councillor Thomas knows much more about that than I do. We've got a high risk on technology and IT failure. We were hoping to reduce this risk, but we are becoming subject to ever more sophisticated scamming and phishing threats, and we're having to undertake a lot of mitigations, which includes face-to-face training and a lot of awareness for staff, so that we don't become subject to any kind of hacking or anything like that. So that threat remains high, and so does the risk score. We move on to economic and financial. It probably isn't any surprise to anybody that the failure to operate within a sustainable budget is one of our highest rated risks. We have a lot of mitigations in place, but we are not in a position to lower this risk score at the moment because the mitigations haven't all come to fruition. And of course, the budget pressures continue. You know, nothing is getting cheaper, everything is getting more expensive. Again, we've got risk 15, which is a project delays and increased costs to external and partner programme budgets. That's a very highly rated risk. Again, we are mitigating it through the work that Duncan Ellis is doing in the capital programme review, but it does remain high. And then number 16 is an emerging risk. Now, we haven't got the wording exactly right on this one, but it's a new risk about planning, and we're going to be spending more time over the coming months to make sure that we've articulated that risk or those risks properly, and that we've scored it correctly and we can do the mitigation plan. But that one really is just a summary and an indication that we're going to do some more work on that one. So if it's okay, Chair, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. There's no hands gone up immediately for questions, so I'd just like to say thank you for, I think, including the emerging planning risks. There is a risk to this council. We lost another appeal last week, and there's a risk that we could lose too many appeals, and the planning department as a whole loses the ability to make decisions on anything, and they would all be centrally made by PINs, and that's a real risk. That would, it has a knock-on effect to the finances as well, because of the money that would go to PINs rather than to us. Just for your word, the government measure the quality and the speed for 12 months, but it's over a 2-year period. The speed is basically 8 or 13 weeks, or as agreed, and the quality is the decisions, proportionate decisions allowed at appeal. And it's not a big percentage to put us into that risk. So that is very much a risk. So I'm glad that's been added. Any questions for Anna? Councillor Thomas.
Yes, I'd like to say how good the report is in general. I'd just like to bring up one particular point and bring it to the attention of the committee, and it relates to the remarks you just made. I was involved in that particular appeal, and at it, the planning inspector made it very, very clear that she was very disappointed that nobody from this council's environmental services attended it, and she expressed herself very strongly on that point. And if you look at what she's got to say about the awarded costs, she makes it clear that, in her opinion, the conclusion of that report was far from a foregone conclusion. And I think it's very important that our own planning department made no attempt whatsoever at that inquiry to defend the opinion of the planning committee. And in her report, the inspector makes it very clear that there were substantial objections to be made to that particular application. And she criticises the council for its failure to make representations. And I know that local residents feel very, very disappointed and let down by the council. And I think that's something that we should bear in mind, because this is not a simple case of the planning committee made a reckless decision against officer advice that had no substantial reasoning behind it. It became very clear that there were very strong objections to that development, very powerfully put by the Brickworks itself, and she was also critical of the failure of East Sussex County Council's Minerals Department to come down on one side or the other. So I think it's very important that we should not use cases like that as a way of inhibiting the planning committee from taking a position of objection to a planning application when it has many, many flaws within it. So that's a really important point to stress. It would not be right to use it as an argument for the planning committee agreeing planning applications which are not soundly based. So I'd really want to make that point to the committee. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas, wearing my other hat as chair of planning, it was noted it will be used, I hope, as an example for learning lessons and training on across the planning department. You are correct in that the inspector did not find it a foregone conclusion, and very much because of the split decision of the committee, decided it was not unreasonable that the committee refused it. So thank you. Those comments have been noted, obviously internally for the planning as well. And I won't let that rest because that one needs to be looked at. And I suspect you've unleashed Councillor Barnes on the same subject. Councillor Barnes.
Although I agree with Councillor Thomas, I too, as you know, Chairman, was very worried by some of the paragraphs in the cost statement, which fortunately did not attribute costs to us. But we left ourselves wide open because we did not actually defend the member decision, nor do we allow any members to defend the member decision. So I think the point actually needs, well, Councillor Thomas was presumably at the appeal. I was at an earlier appeal, again, not one that I'd actually, not on my patch. So I was an observer at that appeal. And again, our defence was weak. Unfortunately, the parish council concerned had hired a lawyer of its own, and we won. We not only defended the member decision successfully, but there was never a question that costs were going to be attributed. So I think there are lessons to be learned from that, but that isn't what I want to talk about tonight.
Just before I come to that, just thinking about that, so Anna will have obviously made notes of those towards the risk for the planning. Carry on, Councillor Barnes.
Well, in a way, that bridges neatly into what I did want to say, because it seems to me we're trying once again to swallow up too many risks under one heading. What we're calling planning risks really are not all planning risks, and there's more than one risk there. Funnily enough, the one that is identified, our failure to deliver a local plan, I don't think will be a failure of submission, but there is going to be a major argument at that planning inquiry about how far we can lower our housing total required. And the biggest risk is we shall have an undeliverable housing total imposed upon us. That's not a failure in the earlier risk of our ability to deliver our social objectives. It's quite a separate risk. But simply we will be put in an impossible situation and possibly forfeit our planning powers. And that is a major risk for this authority. Delivering the local plan, therefore, in a sense, contains within it this absolute bomb which could go off. But the other side of that, and it's a quite separate risk, is that we lose some appeals on major developments and get costs attributed against us. And although I think actually I've done a quiet review of what I can find, but we do need a report on this. I think we, as members, are winning as many appeals as the officers are winning. And it's very pari passu. And much depends on which inspector you get, to be honest. But that risk is a real risk, but it's quite separate from the one around the housing total, which is currently scheduled to be over 800, getting on for 900 houses. We've never in recent years built more than 200. And without a council house programme, frankly, we're not going to build many more than that. We might get it up a bit, but we'll certainly, I think, be faced with at least a 400 total. And our chances of delivering that are pretty limited. So I think there's a major risk there which needs to be separated out from planning risks. It's about an impossible housing total being imposed upon us, but in consequence, really, of the local plan process. But it won't be anything to do with planning.
Yeah, a point.
Just for the record, because not all members on this committee go back that far, we have at the moment still a widening gap between permissions given and houses built. And that is a situation that is not within our control.
Indeed, quite a bit of planning is not within our control. I suppose I'd go back to Anna's first point, is that this was a very early loose wording, starter for 10 and will be refined. And in fact, what you've just said about the housing target also probably goes into the almost risk 2 and social and housing targets. But yes, that is a distinct and separate risk. And I know Anna will have taken notice of that. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to follow up Councillor Barnes' point about housing targets and our repeated failure to come anywhere near meeting them. I think a risk is that the Council will not have a policy on what it's trying to do. Is the Council determined to do its very best to meet whatever government target we are set? Is that going to be an objective of the Council? Or will we continue to fall well short without making any special effort to meet it? Because if we decide we are going to meet it, then we've got to make a decision to devote resources, personnel, etc., to meeting it. So I feel at the moment we're in a situation where no clear decision seems to be made, but where there needs to be a recognition that a clear decision does need to be made. Are we going to try and meet that target, or are we not? What risks might be involved, as Councillor Barnes said, in not meeting that target, including the risk of actually being losing planning powers, or even, because we don't know what the government's going to do, maybe being financially penalised or more generally affected by a government lack of faith in the Council. So there's that issue. There's another issue which I'd like to bring up now, simply because I can't think of any other forum to bring it up in. And that is that the Council has made a response to the NPPF consultation. So far as I know, no member of this Council knows what the Council said its response was. And I'm not aware of consultation with planning about it. There certainly wasn't a consultation with the housing company about it. So I'm curious about who was consulted and what answers have we given? Because this is quite key. What attitude are we taking towards the new policy planning framework? And as I say, no member seems to have been consulted. So I think there is a democratic deficit in terms of the way in which that was done. And I think this committee should be worried about that, because part of our remit is to make sure the Council is acting democratically and transparently. And in relation to this, I fear it hasn't. So I'd like to really make that point. As I say, I can't think of any other place to make it, and that's why I've made it here.
Off the top of my head, the planning committee would be another place to make it. But, and yes, I'm thinking of somehow we put that on the next planning committee, because that's to even if we see the response.
You should be asked or consulted, even if legally you don't have to be, but it simply makes sense that the people who are concerned with planning should be involved in a response about planning, whatever the rules may say. So I'd just like to make that point. It's important.
I'm going to put Councillor Colleen on the spot if she's listening and is near her button and can turn her camera and microphone on. Are you there, Councillor Colleen?
Yes, I am.
Because you're the cabinet lead for planning, were you consulted?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
And saw the responses that they made and compared them with responses that were made by certainly several of the parish council responses.
Thank you.
It's a very narrow sphere of consultation, isn't it? Yes. So I think I recall previous consultations where, when I was the cycling champion, and I worked very closely with officers to write the consultation documents about that. There was proper consultation, and I was able to spread that consultation to other councillors who are interested. And I think that would be a much better model, that there is consultation with councillors in general on a matter of such significance and importance.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Mrs. Mary Barnes first, and then Councillor John Barnes.
But this is taking us well away from the subject in hand. So do you want to continue this?
I'll have John Barnes first and then you.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I was aware that the MPPF consultation had gone through the cabinet member. What seems to me is we do need to close the democratic circuit. I can't see anywhere that this was reported, either to cabinet or the council. And so I have no idea what was said. I think that's the point that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I think that's definitely a matter for me to take up with the planning chair head on and also this chair head. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Mary Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. In this risk assessment chart, there are many mentions of flooding. Well, not many, but a few mentions of flooding, particularly round about section 11, I think it is. But there is nothing about pollution. And I seem to remember that the beach at Bexhill had to be, well, not exactly closed, but certainly people were advised not to swim in the sea, but certainly on more than one occasion. And although I realise that there's not an awful lot we can do with Southern Water and their determination to open the valves so many times during a day, I do think it should be flagged up as a risk, because it's a risk to health and it's a risk to the tourist industry. It's a, we are told that, it's causing a lack of trust in the, within the public. And I think it should figure on this list somewhere. As I say, I don't know whether it actually fits on 12 on environmental climate change, because it's nearly always due to pollution, to flooding. But I really do think it's so important that it ought to be in here somewhere.
Yeah, Anna, I mean flooding specifically in 11, but there is no mention of pollution from what I can see.
Yes, as you were talking, I was making notes and thinking about that. I mean, it's something that occurs. I think I'd have to do some more work to understand what the risk is. Obviously, it's not something that anybody wants, but I need to understand how to score that and articulate that, and look to see what work is being undertaken with Southern Water. So I'll definitely make a note of that and have a look into it.
Thank you. On Wednesday this week between 3 and 7 at the bank buildings in the Central Hall in Hastings, Southern Water are holding a, what would you call it, pop-in, because I'm going to pop in the afternoon to talk about their future plans for the water. And where was I at the weekend? Oh, my mind's gone. Oh, anyway, wherever I was, Portsmouth. They've actually got water quality, seawater quality boards that are dot matrix and connected to, and you get updated information all the time. And that is definitely something I would like to, either with Rotherham, Bexhill Town Council hat on. Lovely to get live information about the quality of the seawater. Thank you. But yes, Anna's responded to that. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I think this is a tricky area because it's one over which we have limited control, and I'm not quite sure, since there are very few actions we can take to mitigate the risk. On the other hand, it is a distinct consequence of flooding is that the sewage system gets overwhelmed. And it's not merely the sea. We now know a lot more about this because legislation has been put in place to force water companies to report. But I have to say that sewage is also going into some of our reservoirs. fuel in particular, which seems to me extraordinary, but a necessary concomitant of the fact that there are antiquated sewage works upstream of reservoirs in this county. And so there is a major consequence for us, but it is a difficult one to decide how you will put in a risk register when you are actually not the responsible authority.
Of course, flooding, you think about not just rivers and sea, but if it was a really horrible burst, you would have a terrible problem with sewage and cleaning up afterwards. And whose job's that? Does that fall to? I mean, we have emergency responses and things. Would that fall to this council? I don't know who would be responsible for cleaning up.
The other street cleansing authority,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
It is a tricky one, because as you quite rightly say, there isn't a lot we can do to mitigate it. It's not to say that it isn't a problem, and that's why I think I need to give it a bit more thought with all of these, because it's not that we want to tolerate the risk, you know, which you would kind of do if you can't do any direct mitigations. And it could be that we look at, you know, our lobbying priorities and how we engage with Southern Water and the county and the Internal Drainage Board and the Environment Agency. So it could be more around that, and it could be more of a discussion that might lead to us taking different actions in terms of our relationships and stuff like that, rather than anything that we've got direct control over.
Thank you, Anna. Anything else for Anna? The only thing I would say is we didn't, I had a quick chat earlier, and I'm not sure if you come every committee meeting to discuss risk, but I think you should.
Well, that's very nice of you. You know, I do try and pick up risks wherever I go, really. Gary will probably tell you that I make notes of stuff as we go along. What I would say though is we can't cover everything. So not everything that is a risk is going to appear on the corporate risk register, just because it might not be rated high enough, or we have to tolerate a certain amount of risks. But of course, delighted to attend.
It just gives another air ring that we wouldn't normally get. And it's useful and gives an opportunity. So thank you for that. Yes, I'll invite you to them all. Just checking this. I'm sure this is just for noting when I get back there. Yes, do we note this report with those comments that we've made? And I like the pollution question. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Barnes. Right, agenda item 13, Treasury Management Update. Andrew Balance to introduce. Mr. Balance.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Q1 Treasury Management Update. Very briefly, we are on target to make our Treasury income for the year. We have a target of over £1 million as part of the budget savings from last year. We're fortunate to have the cash balances from the LUF and the LUP in our bank account in advance. So we are well on target to make that saving, helped by the very slow decline in interest rates at the minute, slower than were maybe anticipated at the start of the year. On the borrowing side, we've reduced our borrowing in this quarter by repaying a loan. Obviously, the emphasis I've got on borrowing is to make sure that our extensive capital programme doesn't start to cause us to incur borrowing we can't afford. So we are currently reviewing the capital programme, and you'll see evidence of that at the next cabinet in terms of an overview and scrutiny in terms of the capital programme going forward and the draft budget. You'd have heard about the £250 million capital programme going forward, most of which was due to be funded, or a big chunk of which was due to be funded by borrowing. That's not affordable, so we have done quite a bit of work now on bringing down the scale and looking at the business cases and the funding of the various elements of that programme. which will lead to a much reduced requirement to borrow and therefore less of an impact in terms of financing costs on the revenue account. So all of that will come before various committees over the next couple of months. But just to say that anyone worried about the impact of quite a large borrowing programme, that is being addressed, and our actual borrowing will be much reduced from predictions earlier in the year. In terms of investments, as you probably could notice, most of our investments are currently with our banker, Lloyds, and we are looking to diversify our investments and go into very safe money market funds, which are very secure, very liquid funds that are very low risk and produce good returns. But at the minute, I think we have too much money in one place, in that most of it is with Lloyds, apart from the CCLA money and the Hermes money. So we will be looking to diversify our investments in the months ahead. But just to reassure people, we always follow the SLI principles. So that is that security comes first, then liquidity, then yield. So we will always be very careful where we put our money. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Just before I come to the question, I'll just make the observation, obviously, with the arrears, if we were better at collecting the arrears, you'd have a bit more money to move every night to improve the return. Any questions for Mr. Valence on this? Councillor Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to show my ignorance here, Andrew. We got a £5 million loan repayment from Caerphilly County Borough Council. So are we saying that this council are loaning money out to other county councils?
Short term. It's very normal practice for councils to lend and borrow from each other just with short term cash flows.
Okay.
Not long term. Long term we borrow from PWLB there are obviously other sources, but mainly for PWLB. But short term cash flows are frequently traded between councils.
Do we get interest on that money?
Oh yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think probably we should note the success of the way we're managing our cash flows at the moment. We are generating a substantial amount of income, a good deal more than we did in the past. And I think we should recognise that fact.
Thank you. And just to inform the committee members, I haven't got it written in front of me, so I can't remember her surname. But we do have Ola back in our department, in the finance department. I need it written in front of me to even attempt her surname, but it's nice. It's good to have her back. She's very efficient. Thank you. So this is for noting. Do we note it? I'll move it. John, second. Noted. Yes. Thank you. Brings us on to 14, the work programme. So next meeting we have, I doubt if we'll have the Grant Thornton audit findings, will we? Because, will we? Even when they're only starting in November?
Oh, we don't have their findings. We might have a progress report.
Oh, yeah, it might be a progress report rather than
hopefully
findings.
the accounts.
Yeah. And got Gary's internal audit, treasury management update as usual, and the self-assessment annual review. Now I did sort of go off this half-cocked earlier in the year when we formed the new committee. So, and I know certain councillors sweat blood and tears over completing it, but you'll get another chance to do so in December. It was done a year ago and it was down for now. Anybody think there should be anything else on it? Mr. Farmer?
I just noticed that when Darren reported initially, the report said the 22-23 accounts still haven't been cleared because of questions outstanding. So shouldn't that be on the next meeting to get an answer from him?
Yes. Yeah, we'll get that because yes, there were objections to that he had to answer, look into. Right, with that addition, that's that. And we now come, and before I close tonight's meeting, I'd like to offer the committee's congratulations to Anna Everett, who in a few hours' time is becoming RDC's Head of Corporate and Strategic Services. Still doing the same job as she is now, just even more on top. Congratulations, Anna. Next meeting is Monday the 2nd of December. This evening's meeting is now closed and the webcast will be stopped. Thank you, everyone. Good night.